Hello, and you are watching the care and husbandry of Solomon Island leaf frogs. This presentation was originally given at the National Amphibian Expo and on August 9th, 2014. I have since updated it. Without this expo, I probably wouldn't have put this together. A special thanks goes out to Dan, Brian, Corey, Noah, and Homer for putting together such a great event. If you're new to the hobby and you've never been to a expo or a show, or especially an amphibian-only event, give the National Amphibian Expo a quick search on YouTube, and somebody put together a nice video. And it was a very fun event to vend and to speak at. If you are in the amphibian hobby, it's very important to support these types of events, not only for the conservation side, but to keep amphibian-only shows available. Noah Shield was a speaker also on mantellas, and Zach Brinks also spoke on bumblebee toads. A little bit about me: I am Jason Juckums. I wrote Poison Dart Frogs, A Guide to Care and Breeding in 2011 is when that was published. During college, I worked as a keeper and education intern at Wildlife Prairie State Park in Peoria, Illinois. If you ever have the opportunity to go and visit, it's a great facility. That's a one-of-a-kind, unique. They only keep animals that are native to the state of Illinois, and it was a great opportunity for me to really learn some different husbandry skills and to branch out beyond just reptiles and amphibians, getting the opportunity to work with bears and wolves and mountain lions. My education is that I was did my undergrad at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. My major was elementary education. I hold a middle school endorsement in science, social studies, and language arts, so I can teach kindergarten through 9th grade. Leaving college, I taught for 8 years, 5th grade in my hometown of Pekin, Illinois. And then for the last 2 years, I've moved on to another community where I'm the assistant principal and the district IT and transportation director. I did my master's in school administration through St. Xavier University. Just to give some general background for those who may be new to keeping amphibians, really the word amphibian means double life. And that comes from the fact that most amphibians have a free-swimming tadpole phase. What's interesting about Solomon Island leaf frogs, or sylphs for short, as you might hear me refer to it sylphs very many times, they actually undergo what's called direct development, which means that in the egg stage, there's almost like an inner egg that the tadpole develops in, hatches out of, but then the tadpole develops into a frog within the egg. So the froglets actually hatch from the egg as froglets. And as an educator, it's one of my favorite things to discuss because it's one of those things that's often wrong in many school science textbooks, where it says that all frogs go through a tadpole phase, and most teachers teach it as it being incorrect. These are tadpoles that are swimming in puddles or lakes and streams or even rivers, when that's not necessarily true. Cornifer guntherei, which is the new genus name for Solomon Island leaf frogs, is a species. It's all on its own in a genus that is a direct development. What I have listed is many of the other species that are also direct development. Being on an island that doesn't have the lakes of standing water and things like that, these frogs have evolved in order to survive in this habitat. Giving you some background, if you take a look at this map, and this is going to be something that's very important to us for future reference to when we start talking about the different bloodlines and why we shouldn't be mixing them, the Solomon Islands are just that. It's a group of islands in the Pacific, and Solomon Island leaf frogs are very common throughout. When you look at this map, everything that's in that golden color is areas that they can live and that they're naturally found in their range. What you see that's not is typically the higher elevations in the mountainous regions of these islands. So they're considered to be very much widespread. The thought is they're found in the rainforest as their primary place, but they're highly adaptable. So we should think about them almost like the American toad. We can have sprawling urban areas, and we can find this species there. We can find them in drainage ditches and things like that. And that's very similar to what it is for the Solomon Island leaf frogs. What's cool, that draws everybody into them is that cryptic look that looks like leaves, and so anywhere that there could be that leafy area, we can find them. I started keeping Solomon Island leaf frogs, I believe it was around 2005 when I purchased my very first ones. Again, we'll be talking later in the presentation about things such as bloodlines and things like that. I purchased mine from Patrick Neighbors, and the overwhelming majority of those that are found in our hobby today are those that were first bred by Patrick Neighbors. And he found a group of yellows and bred them together, and that's what we have today. When I first bought mine, they were a newer species, and so the first thing that I have to do is, when I'm thinking of something, I think, okay, so what is the weather data from where they're found? That's going to give me some ideas of how to keep them in captivity. So WeatherSpark is where this data is coming from. It's going over, I believe it was 2013 weather data to give you an idea, just where the averages are. And so all this information is coming from the Hanura International Airport, which is formerly Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. And so if that sounds very familiar from social studies class, it should, from World War II. Henderson Field was a U.S. military installation for Guadalcanal during World War II. So this is where this is taken from. Now, think about airports, wide open space. This weather data equipment is primarily in direct sunlight. So we got to take some of it with a grain of salt, as in this is what the temperatures are where they're found to an extent, but we have to know what the variations are here. And so what we can look at, and probably a grain of salt's not a good term for it, but when we look at this chart, we see that the weather stays very constant. We have that January 25th marker, and it says 86 degrees Fahrenheit to 88 in November 23rd. And we have the lows that don't even dip below 72. That's some great average weather. I can speak from my collection when we get to it here in a little bit. Mine have gone lower in temperatures down to 65, and I've not seen any ill effects. Think about the forest. They're on the forest floor. They're going to have more cover. So we're really looking at a species that's probably really staying, right around that air temperature, between 75 maybe to 80 degrees on an average daily day as it's underneath the leaf litter, and it may get down to that 65, but probably not in the forest area. I should say, if it's in the ground, maybe a little bit cooler at times, but it's probably only going to get down to 70 degrees. Humidity is another big point. These frogs like it humid, and that goes directly into the substrate you're going to want to keep them in. I keep mine as humid as possible, but they still need ventilation. And it really depends on what type of tank that you're using for this. So as we see, the higher humidities points, tend to be in the mid-90s, and we got these lowers. It gets down to nothing lower really than that 64%. So daily mistings and things like that will be very critical to their care. This is a very important map layout of a bar graph for us of the average type of precipitation. That was the key things to me is what I look for is, okay, so am I going to end up putting these in a rain chamber? Will a misting system work? Will daily misting work? Things like that. When you look at this, we got about 58%, well, I believe it is 58% of the precipitation is drizzle, light rain, and moderate rain, which is nice because right then and there that just a traditional commercial misting system or hand misting on a daily basis will be enough to trigger the breeding response in this species. That heavy rain to thunderstorms being the 42%, that's almost like if you're a larger institution. I know that St. Louis Zoo has the ability to use a hose, and it's pumped out through the hose RO water, and they can literally rinse out their tank systems with RO water. Um, I hope to be able to do that at some point in time. Eventually, once I get all the containers for it, and I know other people who have larger collections who are actually able to do that in their collection. So their home personal collection, they have these large 60-gallon cylinders, and then they have pumps on them that they can literally pump the water, and they're making RO like crazy. And that's on a smaller scale. Daylight hours, you'll see that it does not stray very much from 12 hours. Again, if you're keeping poison dart frogs, which seems to be a very popular one for the groups of folks who keep amphibians and things like that, you're keeping that 12-hour time, 12-hour night, 12-hour day, which is very simple and very nice, easy to do on a timer. Using that information and getting some knowledge of keeping them, I started off keeping my group in a 55-gallon acrylic aquarium once they were adults. The babies I raised in critter keeper size containers. It was a little rough at first. I did lose my very first ones I bought in around 2005. I bought another group in 2006, 2007 because that's about time I graduated college and bought my own home and moved to my own home, and I moved them out with me. So I build it just like a dart frog tank. I build a drainage layer. I use the Leica clay balls. You can also use egg crate to create that false bottom. Then I use landscaping fabric, and then I use hardwood bulk bark mulch. That's the critical part. I'm not here to sell anything, to tell you, use Zoomed cypress mulch or Eco Earth or anything like that. They're great products in certain applications, but what the issue is that I have is that it breaks down too quickly. I don't use a cypress mulch in this type of a setting. If I was using anything, it'd been a cocoa fiber, and if you're going to end up using something like that, because I know some folks do, you're really looking at monthly changing and cleaning it. Whereas with the hardwood mulch, it can go for 8 months to 12 months before it really needs a refreshing, and I would strongly encourage that because of the high humidity, it breaks down. And all a hardwood mulch is a lot of the oaks and things like trees like that are mulched up for it. And I'll show you a bag here in a bit. I like to use the pothos leaves, so they grow very quickly, and then you got to have a lot of leaf litter. I keep them in 1.2 to 1.3 groups, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more at the end of the presentation. I've experienced some aggression among females and males, so watching very closely, it's really tied to the leaf litter and establishing territories, and it can be fatal. Here are two of my Exoterra setups. Again, those are the 18 wide, the 36 long, and the 24 high units. Personally, I purchased mine when PetSmart throws them up for sale on Black Friday for something like $100. And then I get my hardwood mulch at Menards or Lowe's. I've seen it available at both of those hardware stores. I'm not for 100% sure for Home Depot, but I'm going to assume that Home Depot carries it too if Lowe's carries it. And again, the leaf litter is an important part. Now on the Exoterras, I should note too that I do keep it open screen lid, but I use towels. As you can see, there's a towel over the rug. I have a pole light in that area that helps block the light going in there also, that tank. But I also cover those up partially to help keep the humidity in. Whereas in my 55-gallon, I have glass across the top. You can see like some wood in the corner. That's a fake tree that I've built into it. There's ventilation within that. I do mist all my frogs, and I mist them a couple times a day typically. So when I'm actively trying to breed, I keep the light cycle at 12-12, and I do that for both wet and dry seasons. I mist twice daily for 30 seconds, and I keep my temperatures between 74 and 78. Night temperatures between 69 and 72, and just to let you know, that's typically more that spring, summer, and early fall here in the Midwest. I'm located in the Peoria, Illinois area, so it's very easy for me to keep them in my basement and to be able to cycle that. On the dry season, which is in the winter, I mist once a day, keep the temperatures, and they just naturally drop. I do use supplemental heat. That's actually, I'm recording this in January of 2017. This is the update. I've had to not mist at all to get females to stop breeding at times, because even just a daily misting, they'll continue to breed. My thoughts is naturally in the wild, they probably breed throughout the year, because I've noticed some of that behavior. But because I have males and females together in a smaller confined area, I don't want to overbreed my females. That's definitely a concern that I have, just for the health and safety of them. And being a responsible keeper and being responsible to the hobby also. The hobby can't withstand, breeding a ton of frogs, because the amphibian hobby, when it comes to the overall herpetological community, is a much, much smaller slice of the pie. I know a lot of folks who are formerly gecko breeders or snake breeders who are wanting to try something different and get into the amphibian world. Your market is much smaller in the amphibian world than it is for snakes, turtles, and geckos. There's some resemblance in the amphibian community to the gecko community, whereas there's some morphs and then there's the true natural beauties. For the most part, it's the true natural beauty, but the morphs really fall in line with the Cranwellii, the Pac-Man frogs. There's so many morphs for those, and those are kind of like the leopard geckos to us in the amphibian world, whereas everything else, we are very true to breeding, and locale to locale. Kind of like the Leachianus geckos. You want to keep Moros with Moros and Nuana with Nuana as much as possible. That's how we are with our Azurius, breeding Azurius to Azurius, or a Cobalt Tinctorius to a Cobalt Tinctorius. So that will go into our bloodlines also, but really trying to be that responsible keeper, keeping it where we're not flooding the market, because so much of the amphibian hobby has become a flooded market at times. It's just because of personal likes. Everybody wants to breed, things like that, and not everybody has the same outlet to do so. I don't discourage it. Something that we'll talk more about this species is some folks have had difficulty keeping babies alive, and there's certainly some tips that I've learned that have helped me keep entire clutches going. But like I said, everybody wants to try breeding, and so I'm not going to gloss over it. Here's one of my green males with a yellow female, an amplexus. What's important to have is, of course, a male and a female. Females get between 3 and 3.5 inches, where I've had males between 2 and a larger male at 2 3/4 inches is the largest one that I've had. So really the size is the best way to determine them once they're an adult. Young juveniles under a year are near impossible to sex. Males many times have the presence of the ducks, and you can see those 2 lines. I got a red arrow pointing to one of them, and you'll not see that on the female on the right side. Again, size is a good way, the ducks are another good way. If you're trying to see the ducks and there's a pattern of darker skin on the belly of a sylph, another way of doing it, is it's not going to hurt the animal, is to use a nice high-powered LED flashlight to the behind. A lot of times it helps you just see the ducks closer up front. You're not going to see them in the large females as easily. Just going to say it that way. It's not a foolproof way. A lot of people tell you they're hard to sex. I'd tell you pretty much if they're under a year, they're near impossible. Once they hit this age, I typically have been able to find the ducks. What sometimes you see on the other females is what you see on the left-hand side, is you'll start seeing in the back girth, you'll start seeing these yellow deposits form. You'll see a small one, and in about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, you'll see something similar to this, where you can actually see the size of the eggs. You'll see pea-sized little eggs in her. It takes right around, once you see the yellow sac, about 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks for those to form. And then breeding takes place. I love this species. I think it's easy for beginners. The reason why it would not be great for a beginner many times is when we have to plan ahead for the calls. This is not a low-level sound frog. I can hear them on the main floor of my home with them being in the basement. So that is something you need to keep in mind. If you're using these in a kid's bedroom because your teenager or junior higher wants these, females do vocalize, but they're not very often. So you're probably going to want to find a female if you can. If you're looking for the male, he's towards the center. Now my misting typically takes place around 6:30. This calling will start about 8 o'clock at night, and it will go for about an hour. Just 30-second bursts, just like that. Sometimes a little bit longer, going up to 60 seconds. You can hear other frogs in the background. Once my other tree frog species, I believe you could hear Thelderma cortical, and probably you could hear Thelderma asperum in the background at that time, calling also. Along, if you heard that there might have been a low call too, you may have heard lemur frogs in there too. Once the other frogs start calling, everybody starts calling too. So it's like, hey, we got other friends calling. So now, once the calling starts, it could take a few weeks for them to start wanting to reproduce. It doesn't happen instantly with the calling. If you find eggs across the surface or on top of your leaf litter, like on the left, those are infertile eggs. Some species tend to absorb their eggs in Herpetofauna. The sylphs have got to release them. And you can see on the picture on the left, you can see the eyes and the tadpole developing. So, once you've seen your female with eggs, you've heard the calling, give it some time, check your female's belly, and once you see the eggs are gone, you want to start digging in your substrate. And again, I recommend hardwood mulch. I typically also wear nitrile gloves when I do this, just because I'm around so many different species, and I will switch gloves in between tanks. So if there's anything that happens, I'm keeping good, healthy procedures here. But I just use a deli cup. I put a little bit of water in there, and I place the eggs inside of it. And it's room temperature water. I like to keep a gallon jug around just in case I have to go looking for eggs. And I'll swirl it around a few times until I get it to the way it is on the right. And that's how I clean my eggs. Now I know some folks don't clean them or they put them in sphagnum. I like to watch the development. This is a good way for me to make sure that all of them are viable, or to separate ones that may die in the egg or the infertile eggs as quickly as possible so they don't grow moldy and start growing mold on good eggs. What I also use is a product called Turfus MVP. It is a clay substrate. Now, some of you may have heard of Super Hatch, which is a Repashy product. I know Pangea has a similar hatching product that's clay-based. It's the same thing. You could purchase it if you're only breeding, going to have a breeding pair or two. You're not going to want a big bag. Turfus MVP, I think it's a 50-pound bag. I buy it from a local agricultural supply store. It's used for baseball fields. 50-pound bag cost me like $12. A small bag is going to cost you about that from Pangea or from the other vendors, but you can order that and get it to the mail. It should be enough to fill up one box. And I use these boxes. They're called glassy boxes. They're a type of acrylic clear shoebox I get at the Container Store. I really like them because they're so clear. They have 5 air holes on each side. It's a ventilation hole. I just seal those up. I shoot a little silicone bead into each one of them just to cap them off. And it pops out real easy, and you're going to want to have it so you can pop them out later on. because I actually raise my froglets in these containers, and that's one of the tricks that I've found that really helps with the viability. So once I get that water almost clear from cleaning the eggs, I will just pour that out right on the turfus. The turfus you're going to want to rinse very well multiple times, and then it's going to be wet, and you're just going to put it in the box, and probably about 1/4 of an inch thick is what you're going to want. I then cover the eggs. The eggs are about the size of a pea. That's a U.S. dime next to those eggs that are probably about 3 weeks off from hatching, and I cover them with magnolia leaves. Again, in the wild they bury them, and you have to dig them up. Some folks bury them in sphagnum moss. I've seen folks put them in cocoa fiber, moist cocoa fiber, and bury them. I have found this method to be extremely beneficial because I've gotten better hatch ratios with hatching them above and then putting them in the box. Here's the information. I'll leave this slide up again. This is the Container Store. This presentation was originally in 2014, so I don't know if these shoe boxes have gone up in price. I've purchased a number of them at this time. I will tell you, if you are a sneaker collector, I've got a few pairs of sneakers that I like. The Puma Poison Dart Frogs. This is what I replace the actual box with to keep them in, or these acrylic boxes. And I know that the Container Store does still carry these glassy shoe boxes. So, some things to be thinking about. The clutches are typically between 10 to 25 eggs. Seeing 30 plus is possible. I want to say my largest was right around 35, 36. I keep them at room temperature. Whatever my frog room temperature is, I leave those boxes out. In fact, I believe in the picture of the Exoterras, there's one of the egg hatching boxes in there, in that picture. So I keep them at room temperature, so it'll fluctuate between that. And they typically hatch between 50 and 65 days, and that also depends a little bit on what that room temperature is. Once you put the eggs in the box, you're going to keep checking on them. If they're freshly laid eggs, in about 2 weeks, you'll be able to start seeing which ones are bad. They're not going to have that they're not going to be very clear. They're not going to have that pretty white center. They're going to start turning yellow. They're going to be hard to see through, and you're going to want to pull those out. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with what they are, you might just want to set up a separate deli cup with some turfus in it, or that clay incubation substrate to put them in, and then they'll go bad. If they are bad, they could keep on hatching and developing within that deli cup also. Here's a picture of some great looking little babies hatching out. If you caught it on the poisonfrogs.net Facebook page, a couple weeks ago we live streamed some hatching on Facebook, and we also did a YouTube live stream hatching of some cute little froglets. I got the idea to do that again at the National Amphibian Expo. Again, here's a picture of those babies again, and pointing to is the yolk sac. They are born with the yolk sac, and you can see it in their bellies, especially if you flip them over and on top. So you do not feed your froglets for the first week, typically. I've had them go for as long as a week and a half, 2 weeks before I could feed them. If you dump food in too soon, you're going to stress them out and you're going to lose your babies. I don't handle the babies in any way. I do not transport them from one container to another. My first breeding was in 2012, and I was letting the babies hatch out inside the tank with the adults in the 55-gallon. The adults didn't seem to notice that they were around. I was just pulling out 15 to 20 babies each time, and I think handling them was part of my issue. I know some others have written who have kept them that they've had issues with keeping a great number of them viable. I have found if I take the eggs, put them in these boxes, and I leave them in there up until they get to that almost quarter size, they do the best. I feed crickets for the first few weeks, and by then I get them onto pinhead crickets as soon as possible. As soon as I can get them to start eating, I try to get them on pinheads. I try not to feed fruit flies. Once they start eating crickets, they start growing much quicker. I like to use banded crickets, and I get mine from Gann's Cricket Farm. Once they get to 1/8-inch crickets or a little bit bigger, that's when I start pulling them out of the shoe boxes and then putting them in 10-gallon tanks that are set up as smaller vivariums for them. But I try to keep them in the shoe box from up to almost 3 months, and that has really reduced. I've been able to keep clutches of 20, where I know some will tell you, oh, you get a clutch of 20 to 25 eggs, you're really only going to get 10 to survive. That's been my greatest success. So I don't handle them. And here's just a quick rough down of where it goes. We have the eggs that I've dug up. I've got, you can clearly see after I've rinsed them, you can see the tadpole developing, the frog, and the froglets that fit on a dime. So now we can discuss the bloodlines that are in the hobby. These are a great-looking cryptic group of wild-caughts. We really like the wild-caughts that have come in recently. But when I first did this presentation, there was not a lot being brought in, and so this was a great opportunity for this update to discuss these things. What I've started calling, and I've talked with Zach Brinks, a good buddy of mine, Joe Hupp, and a few others who I've talked to at different shows who have kept Solomon Island frogs, of just calling them bicolored because most of them have multiple colors that are on the wild-caughts. And the ones that we have that were the old line that a lot of folks have are the yellows, the bright yellows. They have a orangish yellow. They are a red and pinkish color, even green. As you saw in my cover picture, that's what's found in the Patrick Neighbors line. But these wild-caught ones are the upper left-hand corner. The two on the paper towel are just not done justice. That was actually taken at NARBC Tinley Park in October of 2016. I picked those up from Strictly Reptiles. They're one of those who have been dealing with the wild-caught specimens. That's a cream and red on both of those, so it's great. But we have a lot of these new wild-caughts coming in. I will be honest with you, Jordan Russell has brought them in, and a few others. I bought some from Jordan. I had one male left that made it. The female did not. And then I bought an initial wild-caught group that I had no luck with, which was a group of, I believe, 8. This most recent group of wild-caughts that I have purchased have done the best. They have acclimated the best, and they are constantly calling at this time, and I have eggs from that group. So we will have, I'm looking forward to seeing how these come out. The classic line is the Patrick Neighbors, and here's exactly what I'm talking about. We have a lot of tans, we have that bright yellow, we have that orangish color hue that's kind of a reddish yellow mix. That one in the lower left hand side actually turned out to become a red specimen. You can see the pinks in its faces. Some of these have been born with almost a mask like that wild-caught one you saw, but those have faded as they've grown into adults. And so one thing that interests me right now is how do these wild-caught babies look in captivity, and for how long? Would there be a possibility that we need to introduce UV lighting more into the hobby of amphibian keeping, especially with this species, to pull out some different colors in the animals? And there is a classic 90s import, and it's a zoo line that is established. I know some of these are out in the hobby, or were at the time of the original presentation. At this time, I know that 2 people that I know who had them out of the zoo line no longer have them. They lost their specimens. So whether this line is still in the hobby today, I don't know, but you can see that these look different than the wild-caughts. These look different than the captive animals. They're actually also smaller than the wild-caughts and the captive Neighbors line. So I find that very interesting. Now, the line that I'm actually working with, and the group that the pictures I've shown, is in 2011, I believe it was, Jerry B. I purchased his adults. He purchased from Patrick Neighbors and was breeding in the southern Illinois area, Missouri area, um, salmon island leaf frogs, and wholesaling the babies out. I bought out his breeders, which was comprised of a wild-caught tan male that was straight, kind of uglyish, straight tan, like the one seen in that picture with the yellows, and it was producing the greens and the yellows and the hues. And then there's the Patrick Neighbors line. So what I would call compatible lines is that Patrick Neighbors, the Neighbors animals that you can buy from Patrick, or you can buy from Josh's Frogs, or many other folks who are breeding them that you've seen that line. And then there's that Jerry B cross the Neighbors line. That's what I've had. I've traded with Josh's Frogs for different bloodlines, so I know that they have frogs from me that are that cross. Those groups of frogs, I would say, are completely compatible to be breeding and intermixed with. The current wild-caught ones that are currently in the country that are coming in, I want to say they started coming in 2014, 15, and 16. We need to keep those lines separate. We don't have locale information of where these animals are collected. Just giving the cryptic differences between them and both coloring, the way the coloring is, and some of the body features even at times. I believe the wild-caughts need to be separated. We don't know which islands they're collected from, so we'll keep those lines different. Same way with that early 90s line. I wouldn't cross that with, especially given the size difference, with the wild-caughts that we have today, the F1s from that, or the Patrick Neighbors line. I think there's a lot of confusion in the hobby, especially for those who are new, of what is a bloodline. You'll see people post all the time that, oh, this is Black Jungle's line of Azurius, or this is, sorry, can't think of any other names, John Doe Exotics line. The questions you really need to be asking are, who is your original source from? What is the lineage? Or who did you purchase your stock from? To get the information about who the bloodline really is. The bloodline is really determined by who was the first initial person to breed them in captivity, or who was that importer who imported them into the country. So when I say Neighbors line, Patrick Neighbors was able to run across these yellow wild-caught salmon island leaf frogs from a couple of different various sources, and I might be wrong on a couple sources, but he tracked them down, and he was the first one to breed them, first one to have them available in the hobby and make them widespread in the hobby. So we just call them the Patrick Neighbors line or the Neighbors line just because we know that that was the original breeder. So yes, it's good not to be breeding brothers and sisters from the same clutches, but we also need to know, you're not necessarily not breeding related species because you've purchased from multiple different vendors. I can tell you that I know myself, I believe Josh's Frogs has, because they produce several hundreds of salmon island leaf frogs, have wholesaled these animals. So there are other sellers who are reselling these animals. They may not have produced them, but we're dealing with the same bloodline. And so if you're already working with a bunch of the yellows, the greens, that orange color that I know I've shown, you're dealing with the established bloodline. The new bloodlines that are coming in are really those wild-caughts. The last thing I would talk to you about would be aggression. Aggression is not uncommon in this species when leaf litter is disrupted, whenever you really disrupt the tanks that the animals are in. They are really working on towards that whole establishing their territory. And with them, I've had frogs die. I have a large female. She's the largest female that I own, who is a bright yellow animal. This limeish, greenish yellow male frog was bit in that leg, you can see in the back, by her. These are an ambush predator. I feed crickets, appropriate sized crickets, their whole life. I also occasionally throw in some earthworms. I've seen them eat those. I don't keep roaches anymore, so a lot of mine are just between domestica, brown crickets, and banded crickets. I try not to feed adult banded crickets because they do chew on your animals. But they will take roaches also. Be careful though, because the roaches will nest and reproduce in these vivariums, and so that's why I don't really feed roaches and really stick to crickets. I have had crickets reproduce in the tank, and that can be a mess too. So they will bite each other though. I'm sorry. I've had leg contusions. I've had females, one female kill multiple males who have tried to breed with her because of territory, is what I'd put it down to. I've had less male to male, but they're an ambush predator. They don't move around, so when one hops by them, they will take a bite out of them sometimes. So feed heavily and keep a lot of leaf litter in there. If you have a bite wound, I treat with the silver sulfide cream, or you can also treat it with a triple action antibacterial cream like a Neosporin. Make sure it just doesn't have the pain relief added to it, because that can be lethal to your animal. Most of them heal up nicely. If you're using too small of a vivarium for them, these guys really need a 40 breeder tank, or the 55, or the larger Exoterra. They will knock off their horns off their eyelids or their nose from hitting the screen top or from hitting the glass. You'll want to treat those with the antibacterial cream or the silver sulfide cream also, but they will not heal. Or they will heal, I'm sorry, they won't grow back, so you'll kind of disfigure the animal in a way. They really lose that beauty of the leaf litter frogs, so keeping them in an appropriate size housing is very critical. If you have any questions concerning the care or propagation of them, hit me up on Facebook, like our page, poisonfrogs.net, or you can visit my website, poisonfrogs.net. I have my email on there, or it's just Jason Juckums, JASON JUCHEMS @yahoo.com, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible with any questions you have on how to keep these guys. Here are some of my sources of my information that I gathered, but I am always open to a good conversation or sharing some information on how you keep them. But this is how I keep them. This is how I've been very successful in breeding them. No one way is the right way, is a great way of putting it. We all learn different ways, and we all have found different methods that work best for us. I know Josh's does things differently, and I'm sure Patrick does things differently than I do, but I hope you found this beneficial. Thank you for listening.